The monitor flatlined at 11:47 p.m., and while everyone stepped back, Dr. Claire Ashford stepped forward, her hands already moving before permission was granted. What happened next would force her to reveal a past she'd buried 3 years ago. If you want stories of courage under pressure, subscribe to Emergency Heroes Stories. The automatic doors of St. Catherine Memorial Hospital's trauma bay hissed open at 2:34 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. Claire Ashford pulled her surgical mask up, adjusted the fit twice, and kept her eyes on the intake board. 6 weeks into her residency. 6 weeks of keeping her head down. "You're the replacement?" Dr. Marcus Brennan stood in the doorway of Trauma 1, arms crossed, white coat immaculate, even at this hour. His eyes moved from her face to her hands to her shoes, cataloging, dismissing. "Yes, sir, Dr. Ashford. I'm covering Dr. Reyes's shift. A first year." "Yes, sir." He turned without another word, and Claire followed him into the controlled chaos of the trauma bay. 3 nurses prepped equipment. A 4th checked monitor leads. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the metallic tang that always meant blood was coming. "Incoming GSW to the abdomen," Brennan said, not looking at her. "You'll observe. Touch nothing unless I tell you to touch it. Clear?" "Clear." And Ashford. He glanced back, his expression flat. "I know your type. Late starter. Probably watched too many medical dramas and thought you could handle the real thing. This isn't television. People die when residents get ambitious." Claire's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed level. "Understood." She took her position at the edge of the surgical field, hands clasped behind her back, and waited. The patient arrived 4 minutes later. Male, mid-20s, pale, pressure dressings already soaked through. The paramedic rattled off vitals while the nurses transferred him to the table. BP 90/60 and dropping, heart rate 130. Single GSW, right lower quadrant, exit wound posterior. Brennan snapped his gloves on and moved into position. "Let's open him up. Scalpel." Claire watched his hands, confident but not fast, methodical but not efficient. He was good, she could see that, but he worked like someone who'd only ever operated in controlled environments. The abdomen opened, blood pooled immediately. "Suction," Brennan said. The field cleared for a moment, then filled again. "Liver lack," one of the nurses said. "I can see that." Brennan's voice carried an edge now. "Clamp, small Richardson." Claire's eyes tracked the bleeders. 3 visible, but there was a 4th he hadn't seen yet, tucked behind the liver's edge. The angle was wrong from where he stood. She'd seen this exact injury pattern before, not in Oregon, but in a field hospital outside Lashkar Gah, with mortar fire shaking the tent walls. Her hands stayed behind her back. Brennan worked for another 6 minutes. The bleeding slowed but didn't stop. His movements grew sharper, less smooth. "Pressure's dropping," the anesthesiologist said. 85/55. "I know." Claire took 1 step forward. "Dr. Brennan, I didn't ask for input, Dr. Ashford. There's a bleeder you're missing, posterior edge of the liver. About 2 centimeters from your clamp." He didn't look up. "If there was, I'd see it. The angle's wrong from your position. If you retract slightly and shift the liver medially." "Step back, doctor." She stepped back. The patient's pressure dropped to 80/50, then 75/48. The monitor's alarm began its insistent beeping. Brennan repositioned, finally saw the bleeder Claire had identified, and clamped it. The bleeding stopped. Pressure stabilized at 82/53. He closed in silence. When the patient was wheeled to recovery, Brennan stripped his gloves and turned to Claire. His face was unreadable. "You were right," he said. "But don't ever contradict me in my OR again. You observe, that's all. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir." He left. Dr. Nora Patel, the 3rd-year resident who'd been assisting, stayed behind. She watched Claire with open curiosity. "How did you see that?" Nora asked. "For where you were standing, the angle was impossible." Claire shrugged. "I study anatomy a lot. Nobody studies anatomy that well." Nora tilted her head. "You didn't even hesitate. You knew exactly where it was. Lucky guess." "That wasn't luck." Nora stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I've been here 3 years. I've seen a lot of residents come through. None of them move like you do." "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Nora's eyes narrowed, but not unkindly. "You stand like someone who's used to being in charge. You assess a room in under 5 seconds. And you called that bleeder like you'd seen it 100 times before." Claire kept her face neutral. I need to check on post-ops. She walked out before Nora could ask anything else. The resident lounge was empty at 4:18 a.m. Claire sat in the far corner, away from the windows, and stared at her hands. Steady, no tremor, no hesitation. She'd spent 3 years learning to hide those hands. 3 years working ER intake, triage, discharge paperwork, anything that kept her away from surgery. 3 years building a new identity as someone unremarkable. But hands remember. Hands that had sutured a severed femoral artery while rounds impacted 30 meters away. Hands that had cracked a chest open on a Humvee floor because there was no time to wait for the OR. Hands that had closed the eyes of Lieutenant Sarah Chen when the medevac finally arrived 14 minutes too late. She flexed her fingers once, then stood. The night shift continued. A laceration that needed suturing, a possible appendicitis that turned out to be gastritis. A child with a fever. At 6:42 a.m., as the sun began breaking through Portland's morning clouds, Claire stood at the scrub sink and watched the water run over her hands. Nora appeared beside her. I'm not trying to pry, Nora said quietly, but if you ever want to talk, there's nothing to talk about. Okay, Nora nodded. But for what it's worth, whatever you did before this, you're really good. Claire didn't answer. She dried her hands, pulled on fresh gloves, and walked back into the controlled chaos of St. Catherine Memorial Hospital, where nobody knew Major Claire Ashford had ever existed. The rumors started in the resident locker room 3 days later. Claire heard them before she saw the speakers. She was changing into fresh scrubs after a 12-hour shift, moving quietly in the corner bay, when 2 second-year residents entered, voices low but clear. I'm telling you, Martinez saw the whole thing, the first one said. His name was Kevin something. Claire had seen him twice, maybe 3 times. Ashford called a bleeder Brennan missed, from across the room, so she got lucky. That's what I thought. But then yesterday, she was assisting on a gallbladder case with Dr. Reyes. Standard lap col, routine as it gets. Except Ashford noticed the cystic artery had an anomalous branch before Reyes even started dissecting. How would a first year know that? Exactly, the second resident. A woman named Torres laughed softly. Maybe she's been studying surgical videos all night. God knows some of these late starters are obsessed. Nobody learns to read anatomy like that from videos. Their voices faded as they left. Claire finished tying her scrub pants and stared at her locker door. She'd been careful. She'd stayed quiet, deferred to every attending, never volunteered information unless asked directly. But careful wasn't the same as invisible. She closed the locker and headed to the cafeteria. Morning shift change meant the place would be crowded, anonymous. She could eat quickly and disappear back into the rotation. Dr. Grennan was waiting near the coffee station. Dr. Ashford. His voice carried that same flat authority. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. They walked through the corridor toward the administrative wing, away from the noise. Brennan kept his hands in his coat pockets, his pace measured. You've been here 6 weeks, he said. Yes, sir. Your evals are fine, competent, no complaints. He paused. But I've been hearing things. Claire said nothing. Dr. Reyes says you identified a vascular anomaly before he did. Dr. Patel says you knew the exact location of a retroperitoneal bleed without imaging. Brennan stopped walking and turned to face her. And I know what you called in my OR last week wasn't luck. I study thoroughly, Dr. Brennan. Nobody studies that thoroughly. His eyes narrowed. Where did you train before this? I worked as an ER nurse for 2 years. Before that, I completed pre-med at University of Washington. That's what your file says. Because that's what happened. Brennan studied her for a long moment. You're older than most first years. 34. That's a late start for someone who supposedly went straight through undergrad and med school. I took time off. Personal reasons. What kind of personal reasons? Claire kept her voice even, her face neutral. Family matters. Nothing relevant to my surgical training. Everything is relevant to surgical training, Dr. Ashford. He took a step closer. I've been doing this for 26 years. I know what competence looks like at every level. And what I'm seeing from you doesn't match a first-year resident. It doesn't even match a third year. I work hard. It's not about working hard. His voice dropped. It's about instinct, muscle memory. The way you move in an OR, it's not tentative. It's not learning. It's reflex. Claire's pulse stayed steady, but her hands wanted to curl into fists. She kept them loose at her sides. I don't know what you want me to say, Doctor. Brennan, I want you to tell me the truth. I have. He stared at her for 5 more seconds, then shook his head. Fine, keep your secrets. But understand this. If you're hiding something that puts my patients at risk, I will find out, and I will end your career here. Understood. You're assigned to post-op rounds today. Stay out of surgery. He walked away. Claire stood in the empty hallway, listening to the distant hum of the hospital, and felt the edges of her carefully constructed identity beginning to fray. She made it through post-op rounds without incident, checked vitals, reviewed charts, updated attending physicians, kept her assessments brief and unremarkable. At 2:47 p.m., the hospital's overhead system crackled. Trauma alert, multiple incoming, ETA 4 minutes. Claire was on the 3rd floor when the announcement came. She moved toward the stairs. Not running but not walking either, and reached the trauma bay 30 seconds before the first ambulance. The bay exploded into controlled chaos. Nurses prepped beds. Residents pulled on gowns and gloves. Dr. Brennan appeared from the attending lounge, already barking orders. What do we have? The charge nurse checked her tablet. Construction accident. Steel beam collapse. 6 patients incoming. 2 critical, 3 serious, 1 stable. Get me 2 ORs prepped. Reyes, Patel, you're with me on the first critical. Martinez, you take the set-in with whoever's available from ortho. Claire stayed near the supply station, out of the way. The first ambulance arrived. Paramedics wheeled in a man, mid-30s, pale, unconscious. His chest was partially crushed, breathing labored. Flail chest, possible pneumothorax, the paramedic called out. BP 100/65, heart rate 118, oxygen sat 89%. Brennan moved to the bedside immediately, Patel and Reyes flanking him. The second ambulance came 15 seconds later. Another man, younger, maybe late 20s. His right leg was mangled, bone visible through torn skin. But it was his chest that caught Claire's attention, the way his breathing hitched, the slight cyanosis around his lips, the distension in his neck veins. Tension pneumothorax, early stage, but progressing. Dr. Martinez moved toward him, but he was still gloving up, his attention split between this patient and the incoming 3rd ambulance. Claire's feet moved before her brain gave permission. She was at the bedside in 4 strides, her hand already reaching for the stethoscope hanging near the monitor. Brief sounds, she said to the nurse beside her. The nurse blinked. I haven't checked yet. Claire listened to the left side, diminished, right side, almost absent. He needs a chest tube, Claire said. Martinez looked over, frowning. I'll assess in a moment. He doesn't have a moment. Claire's voice stayed calm, but her hand was already moving toward the supply cart. Tension pneumothorax. He's compensating now, but in 2 minutes, his pressure will drop and he'll code. Dr. Ashford, step back. The patient's oxygen saturation dropped to 84%, then 81%. Claire looked at Martinez, then at Brennan, who had glanced over from the other bed. If someone doesn't decompress his chest in the next 60 seconds, Claire said quietly, he's going to die. Brennan stared at her. The room went silent except for the monitors. Do it, Brennan said. Claire moved. Her hands moved without hesitation. Betadine, Claire said. The nurse handed it to her. She swathed the right chest wall, 5th intercostal space, mid-axillary line. 3 seconds, no wasted motion. Scalpel. The blade was in her hand. She made the incision, 1 smooth cut through skin and muscle, precisely 2 centimeters long. No fumbling, no second-guessing. Clamp. She pushed the Kelly clamp through the intercostal space, spreading the tissue with a practiced twist. The pop of the pleura giving way was audible even over the monitors. Air rushed out. The patient's chest decompressed instantly. Tube, 32 French. The nurse's hands shook slightly as she passed it. Claire guided the chest tube through the opening, her fingers reading the anatomy by touch alone, advancing it posteriorly and superiorly until resistance told her she'd reached the apex. Connect suction. The tube was secured. Claire sutured it in place with interrupted stitches, each knot identical to the last, the spacing perfect, 12 seconds per suture, military precision. The patient's oxygen saturation climbed, 85%, 89%, 92%. His breathing eased, the cyanosis faded. Claire stepped back, stripped her gloves, and only then noticed the absolute silence in the trauma bay. Every person in the room was staring at her. Dr. Martinez stood frozen, his hands still half raised. Dr. Patel had abandoned her position at the other bed. Even Brennan had stopped moving, his eyes locked on Claire's hands. "Jesus," someone whispered. The charge nurse checked her watch. 43 seconds, from decision to tube placement. Martinez found his voice. "How did you? I've seen attendings take 3 minutes for that procedure." Claire said nothing. Brennan crossed the room slowly, his expression unreadable. He looked at the chest tube, at the sutures, at the patient's rising oxygen levels. Then he looked at Claire. "Those sutures," he said quietly, "that's not a standard technique. It works. It's a military technique." His voice dropped lower. "Interrupted horizontal mattress, used in field hospitals when you need maximum hold with minimum time." Claire met his eyes but didn't answer. "Where did you learn that, Dr. Ashford?" "I read about it." "You don't read your way into that kind of muscle memory." Brennan stepped closer. "I'm asking you one more time. Where did you train?" Before Claire could answer, the third ambulance arrived, and the moment shattered. "Second critical incoming," the paramedic shouted. "Male, 29, impaled. Allied by rebar, entry right chest, possible cardiac involvement." But Claire was already gone, moving back toward the supply station, her face neutral, her hands steady. Brennan watched her go, then turned back to his own patient. But his eyes kept drifting across the room. The next 2 hours blurred into a sequence of controlled emergencies. Claire stayed on the periphery, assisting where needed, but never volunteering. She handed instruments, monitored vitals, updated charts. She did not make eye contact with Brennan. At 5:23 p.m., the last patient was stabilized and moved to the ICU. The trauma bay emptied slowly, residents and nurses peeling off toward break rooms and shift changes. Claire was cleaning a suture kit when Dr. Patel approached. "That was incredible," Patel said. Her voice carried no suspicion now, only awe. "I've never seen a chest tube placed that fast, not even by Brennan. I got lucky with the anatomy. That wasn't luck." Patel leaned against the counter. "You knew exactly where to cut, exactly how deep to go, exactly how to angle the tube. That's not first-year skill. That's not even fifth-year skill." Claire kept cleaning. "The way you tied those sutures," Patel continued. "I asked my attending about it. He said that technique was developed for combat surgery, high-stress environments where speed matters more than aesthetics." Claire's hands paused for half a second, then resumed. "Why would a first-year resident know combat surgical techniques?" Patel's voice was gentle, curious, not accusatory. "Unless you weren't always a first-year resident." "I need to finish post-op notes," Claire said. She walked away before Patel could respond. The resident lounge was empty again. Claire sat in the same corner as before, staring at the same hands. 43 seconds. She'd placed chest tubes in worse conditions, in sandstorms, under mortar fire. On patients with 3 other injuries she'd have to address immediately after. 43 seconds was slow compared to her record. But here, in a civilian hospital, with proper lighting and sterile equipment, and no one shooting at her, 43 seconds was impossible for a first-year resident. She'd been too fast. The door opened. Dr. Brennan entered, alone. "I sent everyone else away," he said. "This conversation is private." Claire stood. "Dr. Brennan, sit down." She sat. Brennan pulled a chair across from her and sat as well, his posture deliberate, controlled. When he spoke, his voice carried no anger, only certainty. "I called a friend at the VA hospital," he said. "Described your technique." He confirmed what I already suspected. That suturing pattern is taught exclusively in military surgical training, specifically forward surgical teams. Claire's face remained neutral. "I also called the chief of surgery at Madigan Army Medical Center. Asked if they'd ever had a trauma surgeon named Claire Ashford." He paused. "They hadn't. But when I described you, he got very quiet. Then he asked me if I meant Major Claire Ashford." The room felt smaller suddenly. He couldn't tell me much, Brennan continued. Privacy regulations. But he could tell me you were decorated, multiple commendations, and that you left the service 3 years ago under circumstances he wasn't authorized to discuss. Claire's hand stayed loose in her lap, but her jaw tightened. So I'll ask you one last time, and I want the truth. Who are you, Dr. Ashford? She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the hospital hummed with its endless rhythm of life and death, crisis and recovery. Inside this small room, there was only silence and a choice she'd been avoiding for 3 years. I wanted to start over, she said quietly. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Brennan leaned forward. A patient's life was saved today because of skills you're not supposed to have. I need to know if I can trust you. I need to know. What else you're hiding? Nothing that puts patients at risk. Then what? Claire closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. I was Army. 5 years. Forward surgical teams in Afghanistan and Iraq. I left in 2021. I don't want to talk about why. And you came here as a first-year resident. I wanted to practice medicine without the weight of what I'd done before. You can't erase that kind of training. I know. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Believe me, I know. Brennan studied her in silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped its steady rhythm. I'm not going to report this, he said finally. But I can't let you keep hiding either. You're too skilled to waste on basic procedures. I don't want special treatment. This isn't about special treatment. It's about using your abilities where they matter most. He stood. You're moving to trauma full-time. If you're going to be here, you're going to be honest about what you can do. Dr. Brennan, that's an order, Dr. Ashford. Or should I say Major? Just Claire, she said quietly. That other person doesn't exist anymore. Yes, she does. Brennan moved toward the door, then paused. And whether you like it or not, this hospital needs her. He left. Claire sat alone in the silence, feeling the weight of 3 years of careful invisibility crumbling around her. If you want to see what happens when the past refuses to stay buried, subscribe to Emergency Heroes Stories. Comment below where you're watching from, because what Claire faces next will test everything she's tried to leave behind. The next 3 days passed in uneasy tension. Claire worked trauma rotations under Brennan's direct supervision. He didn't treat her differently, didn't reference their conversation, but his eyes tracked her movements with new understanding. The other residents noticed the shift. Why is Brennan keeping you on trauma? Martinez asked in the locker room. First years usually rotate every 2 weeks. He thinks I need more practice, Claire said. You're the best first year we've had in 3 years. That doesn't make sense. She didn't answer. Dr. Patel was more direct. She cornered Claire near the scrub station on Thursday afternoon, her voice low. People are talking, Patel said. They're saying Brennan found out you have prior surgical experience, that you trained somewhere else before coming here. People talk a lot in hospitals. Is it true? Claire met her eyes. Does it matter? It matters if you're lying on your application. It matters if there's something in your past that... There's nothing that puts patients at risk, Claire interrupted. That's all you need to know. Patel studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, but whatever you're running from, Claire, eventually it catches up. She walked away before Claire could respond. Friday evening brought the kind of silence that emergency departments fear. The calm that precedes chaos. Claire was reviewing charts in the resident station when the overhead system crackled at 9:37 p.m. Trauma alert. Mass casualty incident. Multi-vehicle collision on I-5. Multiple patients incoming. All available surgical staff report to trauma immediately. The words hit like ice water. Mass casualty. Claire's body moved on autopilot. She was at the trauma bay in 30 seconds, pulling on a gown, snapping gloves into place. Around her, the organized chaos of preparation unfolded. Nurses wheeled in extra crash carts. Attendings called out assignments. The air smelled like antiseptic and adrenaline. Brennan stood at the center, coordinating. Listen up, he called out. We have 9 patients incoming. 3 critical, 4 serious, 2 stable. This is going to push us to capacity. I need teams of 3 on each critical. Patel, you're leading Team 1. Martinez, Team 2. Reyes, Team 3. He paused, his eyes finding. In Claire. Ashford, you're with Reyes. Follow his lead. Assist is needed. Yes, sir. The first ambulances arrived 4 minutes later. The trauma bay transformed into controlled madness. Voices overlapped. Monitors beeped. The metallic smell of blood filled the air. Claire moved to her assigned bay where Dr. Reyes was already assessing the patient, a woman in her 40s, unconscious, with severe abdominal trauma. Probable liver laceration, Reyes said quickly. Pressure's 80/50 and dropping. We need to move fast. Ashford, start a second IV line. Claire's hands moved efficiently. IV placed in 20 seconds. Get her to OR2, Reyes ordered. We're opening her up now. They moved as a unit, the patient between them, racing toward the surgical wing. Behind them, Claire heard the second wave of ambulances arriving. More voices, more chaos. Then one voice, strained and urgent, cut through the noise. We've got a chest impalement. Rebar through the right chest cavity. Patient's coding. Where's Brennan? He's in OR1 already. Then get me someone else. This kid's dying. Claire's feet stopped moving. Dr. Reyes turned back. Ashford, come on. But Claire was already looking toward the trauma bay entrance, where paramedics were wheeling in a gurney. On it, a young man, maybe late 20s, with a steel rebar protruding from his chest. His skin was gray, his breathing shallow and rapid. Tension pneumothorax, possible cardiac tamponade, maybe minutes left. Ashford, Reyes said more firmly. We have our patient. That man needs a thoracotomy, Claire said quietly. Right now, or he's dead in 3 minutes. Martinez will handle it. Martinez is already in surgery. Claire's eyes tracked the patient as they wheeled him past. His chest wasn't moving right. The rebar had shifted, likely torn the pericardium. Blood was pooling somewhere it shouldn't. She'd seen this exact injury pattern before. Helmand Province, 2020. A combat engineer named Daniels, impaled by shrapnel from an IED. She'd cracked his chest open on a field table while mortars landed 200 meters away. Daniels had lived. Dr. Ashford, Reyes said, his voice now carrying command. Our patient. The young man on the gurney turned his head slightly. His eyes, half closed, unfocused, caught the light, and in that brief moment, something in his face triggered a memory Claire couldn't quite place. She knew him. Not his name, not yet, but the shape of his jaw, the scar above his left eyebrow. She'd seen them before. Page Dr. Brennan, one of the nurses was saying. This patient needs an attending. There's no time, another nurse responded. Pressure's dropping, 70/40. Then get a resident who can handle it. Claire made her decision. Dr. Reyes, she said, turning to face him. Your patient is stable enough for transport. Mine isn't. I'm staying. You don't have authority. I'm taking authority. She didn't wait for his response. She moved toward the gurney, her voice shifting into something older, sharper, carrying the weight of 5 years in forward surgical units. Get him to Trauma Bay 3, she called out. I need a thoracotomy tray, 4 units of O-negative blood, and someone to assist. Now. The nurses hesitated for half a second, their eyes darting between Claire and the chaos around them. Then the charge nurse, a woman named Stevens, who'd been working trauma for 20 years, made the call. You heard her. Move. They moved. Claire followed the gurney into Trauma Bay 3, her mind already running through the procedure step by step. Behind her, she heard Dr. Reyes shouting something, heard footsteps running. Heard the hospital's careful hierarchy beginning to fracture. But none of it mattered. The young man on the table was dying, and Claire Ashford, whether she wanted to be or not, was the only person in this hospital who could save him. The patient hit the table and Claire's. Claire's world narrowed to heartbeat and breath. Name, she said, snapping on gloves. David Ortega, the paramedic answered. 29 years old, construction worker, rebar penetrated right chest at approximately. I can see where it penetrated. Claire's hands moved over the patient's chest, reading the trauma through touch. The rebar had entered below the 4th rib, angled posteromedially. Cardiac involvement likely. Vitals. BP 68/42 and dropping. Heart rate 142. Respirations 32 and shallow. Claire looked at the monitor. Muffled heart sounds, distended neck veins. Beck's triad, cardiac tamponade. He's got blood in his pericardium, she said. We need to relieve the pressure or his heart stops. Nurse Stevens positioned herself across the table. What do you need? Thoracotomy tray, rib spreaders, Internal defibrillator paddles on standby. Claire's voice carried absolute certainty now. Every word of hesitation from the past 6 weeks burned away. And someone paged Dr. Brennan. Tell him I'm cracking a chest. Stevens's eyes widened slightly, but she moved. You've done this before. Yes. How many times? Enough. A second nurse arrived with the thoracotomy tray. Claire positioned herself at the patient's left side, her mind already 3 steps ahead. Incision site, rib spreader placement, pericardial window. She looked down at David Ortega's face, still gray, still dying. And then she saw it, really saw it, the scar above his left eyebrow. The specific shape of it, surgical, clean, from a laceration she'd sutured herself 4 years ago in a forward operating base outside Sangin. Recognition hit like a punch. Oh God, she whispered. He'd been 19 then. A combat medic trainee, fresh from Fort Sam Houston, terrified and eager. She'd taught him how to pack a wound, how to start an IV under fire, how to keep his hands steady when everything around him was falling apart. She'd sutured that eyebrow after he took shrapnel from a mortar that landed 30 meters from their tent. Staff Sergeant David Ortega. Her hands froze for 2 seconds. Then his blood pressure dropped to 60/38, and the monitor alarm screamed, and training overrode memory. Scalpel, she said. The blade touched skin. She made the incision. Left anterolateral thoracotomy, 5th intercostal space, 1 smooth motion from sternum to mid-axillary line. Blood welled immediately. Rib spreader. Stevens handed it to her. Claire positioned the spreader and cranked it open. Ribs separated with a sound like green wood breaking. The chest cavity opened. She could see the heart now, the pericardium distended and dark with blood. Scissors. She cut into the pericardium. Blood poured out, dark and thick, at least 300 milliliters. The heart, freed from compression, beat stronger immediately. Pressure's rising, Stevens said, 72/46. Claire's hands moved inside the chest cavity, palpating the heart carefully. There, a small laceration on the right ventricle, blood seeping with each contraction. I need 3-O-proline and a pledget. The suture and patch arrived in her hand. She placed the pledget over the laceration and began suturing, each stitch precise, anchoring the patch to healthy myocardium while the heart beat beneath her fingers. This was the impossible part, suturing a beating heart. Most surgeons never attempted it outside of extreme circumstances. She'd done it 43 times. The room had gone completely silent, except for the monitors. Stevens watched with something approaching awe. The second nurse stood frozen, and in the doorway, unnoticed by Claire, Dr. Brennan had appeared. He said nothing, just watched. Claire tied off the final suture. The bleeding stopped. The heart beat steadily, no longer compromised. Pressure's 88/54, Stevens said quietly, holding steady. Claire exhaled slowly. We need to stabilize the rebar before we remove it. Get me, Claire, the voice was weak, barely a whisper, but it stopped her cold. She looked down. David Ortega's eyes had opened. Unfocused, confused, but open, and he was looking directly at her. Claire, he said again. Major, Ashford. The room's silence deepened. Stevens glanced at Claire sharply. Major? Claire's jaw tightened. She kept her eyes on David. You need to stay still, David. You're badly injured. You were in Sangin. His words came slowly, painfully. You taught me how to suture. Under fire. Don't talk. Save your strength. I thought you were dead. His eyes filled with tears. They said, helicopter crash, 2021. Claire's hands stilled. Behind her, she heard Brennan take a step into the room. That wasn't me, Claire said quietly. That was someone else. No. David's hand moved weakly toward her. You saved my entire unit. Ambush outside Marja. You operated for 16 hours straight. Stevens was staring at Claire now. So was the other nurse. And Brennan hadn't moved, his eyes locked on her face. David, please, you got Silver Star for it. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were clear now, certain. I was there, when they pinned it. You wouldn't look at anyone. That's enough, Claire said, her voice harder now. You need surgery to remove that rebar, and I need you stable. Everyone looked for you, After you disappeared. David's voice was fading, but persistent. We wanted so much to thank you, wanted to tell you. His eyes closed. Not death, exhaustion. The sedation finally taking hold. Claire stood perfectly still, her hands inside his chest cavity, blood on her gloves, her carefully constructed civilian identity shattered on the floor around her. Brennan's voice cut through the silence, quiet but carrying absolute authority. Everyone out except Stevens. The second nurse left immediately. The paramedics who'd been lingering near the door disappeared. Stevens didn't move. Dr. Brennan, I'm needed here. I can assist. Out. Stevens glanced at Claire once, her expression unreadable, then left. The door closed. Claire pulled her hands free slowly, stepping back from the table. She stripped her gloves. Her hands were shaking now, just slightly, just enough to notice. Brennan moved to the opposite side of the table, his eyes on the open chest, the repaired heart, the stabilized rebar. Silver Star, he said quietly. Claire said nothing. That's the third highest military decoration, awarded for gallantry in action. He looked up at her. You didn't tell me that part. You didn't ask. I asked you who you were. You said you wanted to start over. I did. I do. By lying? By surviving. Brennan's expression shifted, something closer to understanding crossing his face. What happened in 2021? Claire's throat tightened. I told you. I don't want to talk about it. A patient just told this entire trauma unit that you're a decorated combat surgeon who disappeared 3 years ago. In about 10 minutes, that's going to be all over this hospital. So you're going to talk about it. His voice softened slightly. Not as you attending, as someone who needs to understand. Claire looked down at David Ortega's face. Peaceful now. Alive. She'd saved him twice. Once in a war zone. Once in a place that was supposed to be safe. There was an ambush, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Outside Marja. My unit was escorting a medevac convoy. We got hit. I had 11 wounded soldiers, and a field hospital that was 4 clicks away. She paused. I operated in the back of a Humvee while we were still under fire. 16 hours. Saved 11 of them. 11 out of 15, Claire continued, her voice steady but hollow. 4 didn't make it. One of them was Lieutenant Sarah Chen, my best friend. She bled out while I was working on someone else. Brennan said nothing, just listened. I called Ed for air support 17 times. Medevac was 14 minutes away. Command said the area was too hot. They couldn't risk the helicopter. Claire's hands curled into fists. Sarah died in minute 12. 2 minutes before they finally decided the risk was acceptable. That wasn't your fault. I know that now. Claire looked up at him. But I didn't know it then. I testified against the commanding officer who delayed that medevac. There was an investigation. He was reprimanded, not discharged. And I became the surgeon who broke rank, who put her career ahead of unit cohesion. So you left? So I ran. The words came out bitter. I couldn't operate anymore without seeing Sarah's face. Couldn't make decisions without second-guessing whether I was choosing the right patient. I was a liability, Dr. Brennan. To myself and to everyone around me. She gestured toward David. So I disappeared, changed my life, became someone who didn't have to carry that weight anymore. Except you can't disappear from what you are, Brennan said quietly. You just proved that. I proved I'm still broken. You proved you're still the best trauma surgeon I'd ever seen. Brennan moved around the table toward her. You just performed an emergency thoracotomy and repaired a cardiac laceration in under 8 minutes. Most surgeons wouldn't attempt that procedure. You did it like you were tying your shoes. That doesn't change what happened. No, but it changes what happens next. He paused. That young man is alive because you refused to let your past define your present. Because when it mattered, you stopped running. Before Claire could respond, the trauma bay door burst open. Dr. Patel stood in the doorway, her face pale. We have a problem. 3 more patients just arrived from the same accident. One of them is coding. Martinez is still in surgery. Reyes is closing. And you're both here. Brennan looked at the monitor above David's bed. Stable vitals. The immediate crisis had passed. Get him to OR4, Brennan ordered. Ortho can finish stabilizing and removing the rebar. Ashford, you're with me. Dr. Brennan, that's an order, Major. He was already moving toward the door. You can have your identity crisis later. Right now, people are dying. Claire looked at David one more time, then followed. The hallway was chaos. Nurses running, residents shouting updates, the overhead system crackling with continuous trauma alerts. They reached Trauma Bay 1, where a middle-aged woman lay on the table, her chest open, a nurse performing manual cardiac compressions. Blunt cardiac trauma, the nurse gasped. Arrested 30 seconds ago. No pulse, no cardiac activity. Brennan moved to the head of the table. How long has she been down total? 4 minutes. Get me internal patties. Ashford, take over compressions. Claire positioned herself at the chest, her hands replacing the nurse's, compressing the heart directly. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm automatic, drilled into muscle memory from 100 field hospitals. Charging to 20 joules, Brennan said. Clear. Claire pulled back. The paddles discharged. The body jerked. The monitor stayed flat. Again, 30 joules. Another shock. Nothing. Claire resumed compressions. The woman's heart was cool under her hands, the muscle sluggish. Too much time without oxygen. Too much damage. She's been down too long, Patel said from across the table. We're not going to get her back. We don't give up, Brennan said sharply. Charge to 40. Dr. Brennan, charge to 40. Claire kept compressing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her arms burned. Her mind calculated the odds, less than 5% chance of meaningful recovery at this point. The woman's pupils were fixed and dilated. Clear. Shock. Nothing. Patel met Claire's eyes across the table. The look was clear. This is futile. But Brennan was already preparing another shock. Claire stopped compressing. Dr. Brennan, she said quietly. She's gone. We haven't tried epi. She's been down for 6 minutes with blunt cardiac trauma. Her heart is non-viable. We're not bringing her back. Claire's voice was calm, certain, carrying the weight of someone who'd made this call 100 times before. And we have 3 other patients who still have a chance. The room went silent. Brennan stared at her, his hands still on the paddles. You're calling it? He said. Yes. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Brennan set down the paddles and stepped back. Time of death, 10:23 p.m. He stripped his gloves and walked out without another word. Patel stared at Claire. You just overruled an attending. I made the right call. That's not how hospitals work. That's how triage works. Claire pulled off her gloves. Where are the other patients? Patel hesitated, then pointed. Bays 2 and 4. Both critical but stable for the moment. Claire moved toward Bay 2. Behind her, she heard Patel following. Who are you? Patel asked quietly. Someone who knows when to keep fighting and when to let go. The next 2 hours blurred into a sequence of surgical precision. Claire moved between patients with the efficiency of someone who'd operated in war zones, making decisions in seconds that most surgeons agonized over for minutes. A ruptured spleen, remove in 40 minutes. A severed femoral artery, repaired in 22. A tension pneumothorax, decompressed before the attending even finished gluthing. By the time the last patient was stable and moved to ICU, it was 12:47 a.m. The trauma bay looked like a battlefield. Bloody gauze, discarded instruments, the metallic smell of emergency surgery thick in the air. Claire stood at the scrub sink, washing blood from her hands for the 4th time that night, and watched the water spiral down the drain. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Multiple people. She turned. Dr. Brennan stood in the doorway. Behind him, Dr. Reyes, Dr. Martinez, Dr. Patel. Behind them, a dozen nurses, residents, support staff. All of them silent. All of them staring. Brennan spoke first. I owe you an apology, he said. I've been treating you like a first-year resident when you're clearly one of the most skilled trauma surgeons I've ever worked with. Claire said nothing. I also owe you an explanation, Brennan continued. I've spent 26 years building protocols, hierarchies, systems designed to keep patients safe. And tonight, you broke every single one of them. He paused. And you saved 4 lives because of it. 5, Patel said quietly. David Ortega makes 5. 5 lives. Brennan corrected. Because you refuse to pretend to be less than what you are. He took a step forward. I don't know everything you've been through. I don't know why you left the military or why you came here under a false residency. But I know what I saw tonight. His voice dropped. I saw someone who moves through trauma like it's choreographed. Someone who makes impossible decisions look routine. Someone this hospital desperately needs. Claire's throat tightened. I can't be that person anymore. You already are that person. Brennan gestured to the trauma bay behind him. You can't unmake that kind of training. You can't unlearn that instinct. And tonight proved you shouldn't try. The group behind him murmured agreement. So here's what's going to happen, Brennan said. Tomorrow morning, you and I are meeting with the chief of surgery. We're going to discuss your actual credentials, your actual experience, and what role you should really have in this hospital. I don't want special treatment. This isn't special treatment. This is honesty. His expression softened. You've been hiding, Dr. Ashford, and I understand why, but you can't hide anymore. Not after tonight. Claire looked past him at the assembled crowd. Faces she'd worked beside for 6 weeks. People who'd dismissed her, doubted her, underestimated her. Now they looked at her with something else entirely: respect. The meeting happened at 8 a.m. in the chief of surgery's office. Dr. Patricia Vance sat behind her desk, reading a file that hadn't existed 24 hours ago. Brennan stood near the window. Claire sat in the chair across from Vance, her posture straight, her hands folded in her lap. Major Claire Ashford, MD, Vance said, not looking up. U.S. Army Medical Corps, 5 years active duty, 3 tours, Iraq and Afghanistan. Forward surgical team leader, over 800 combat surgeries documented. She paused. Silver Star for gallantry in action, 2 Army Commendation Medals, 1 Meritorious Service Medal. She set the file down and looked at Claire directly. Honorable discharge in May 2021. Then you disappeared for 18 months, before resurfacing as a nursing assistant in Seattle. 2 years later, you applied to our residency program under credentials that were technically accurate but deliberately incomplete. Vance leaned forward. Do I have that right? Yes, ma'am. Why? Claire met her eyes. Because I couldn't be that person anymore. Because every time I walked into an OR, I saw the people I couldn't save. Because I needed to start over as someone who didn't carry that weight. And did it work? No. Vance's expression didn't change. Dr. Brennan tells me you saved 5 lives last night using techniques and decision-making ability far beyond what any resident, first year or otherwise, should possess. I did what was necessary. You also overruled an attending physician on a code. You performed an emergency thoracotomy without supervision. You made command decisions that violated hospital protocol at least 6 times. Vance paused. In a normal situation, that would be grounds for immediate dismissal. Claire's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. However, Vance continued, this is not a normal situation. You're not a normal resident. And what you did last night, while irregular, was also extraordinary. She stood and walked to the window where Brennan waited. We have a problem, Dr. Ashford. This hospital's trauma mortality rate is 11% above the national average. We lose patients we shouldn't lose. We have competent surgeons, good equipment, solid protocols. But we don't have anyone with your level of experience in high acuity, time-critical trauma. I'm not interested in being showcased. I'm not offering to showcase you. I'm offering you a choice. Vance turned back to face her. Option 1. We terminate your residency for protocol violations and credential misrepresentation. You leave St. Catherine and likely never practice medicine again. Claire's hands tightened in her lap. Option 2. We acknowledge your actual qualifications and create a modified pathway. You complete a condensed residency, 12 months instead of the remaining 4 years, with a focus on civilian trauma protocols and teaching. At the end, you become an attending trauma surgeon with full privileges. And if I say no to both, then you're a fool, Brennan said quietly, because you're one of the best trauma surgeons I've ever seen, and walking away from that doesn't honor the people you lost. It wastes them. The words hit harder than Claire expected. There's a third component, Vance said. If you accept option 2, I want you to develop a trauma training program. Something that brings military medical techniques into civilian emergency medicine. Fast response protocols, damage control surgery, mental resilience training. She paused. The kind of program that could save lives across the country. Claire stared at her. You want me to teach what I've been trying to forget. I want you to teach what no one else can. Vance returned to her desk. But I need to know you're stable, that you're not going to break down in the middle. Diddle of surgery or make decisions clouded by trauma. I won't. How can you be sure? Because I already did. Claire's voice was steady. Last night, I operated on someone I trained in Afghanistan. Someone I thought I'd never see again. And I didn't break. I didn't hesitate. I did my job. Vance studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'm going to make some calls. If I offer you this position formally, I need to verify everything in your military record. I need to speak with your former commanding officers, and I need access to the incident that led to your discharge. Claire's breath caught. That file is sealed. Not to me, if you grant permission. I don't want. I need to know what I'm bringing into this hospital, Vance interrupted. Not because I doubt your skill, but because I need to understand what happened and whether it poses any risk going forward. Claire stood abruptly. The only risk is that people will know I failed, that I made the wrong call and someone died because of it. Did you make the wrong call? I don't know, Claire said, her voice breaking slightly. I'd spent 3 years trying to answer that question, and I still don't know. Vance's expression softened. Then maybe it's time you found out. She opened a drawer and pulled out a document. This is a release form authorizing me to request your complete military medical service record, including classified incident reports. If you sign it, I'll have answers within 48 hours. And if I don't sign, then I can't offer you the position, because I won't put this hospital at risk, no matter how skilled you are. Claire stared at the paper. 3 years of carefully constructed distance, of deliberate forgetting, of survival through anonymity, all of it reduced to a single signature. Behind her, Brennan spoke quietly. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to stop running backward. Claire picked up the pen. Her hand hovered over the signature line. Then she signed. 46 hours later, Claire was called back to Vance's office. This time, someone else was waiting. Colonel James Whitmore, retired, sat in the chair beside Vance's desk. He wore a suit now, instead of a uniform. But his posture was unmistakably military. Late 50s, gray hair, the kind of presence that commanded respect without saying a word. Dr. Ashford, Vance said. This is Colonel Whitmore. He serves on our hospital board. He's also the former chief of surgery at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. Whitmore stood and extended his hand. Major Ashford, it's an honor. Claire shook his hand warily. I'm not a major anymore. Once a major, always a major. He gestured to the chair. Please, sit. Claire sat. Her pulse was steady, but her mind raced. Vance slid a folder across the desk. I received your complete service record yesterday. I asked Colonel Whitmore to review it as well, given his background. And? Claire's voice was tight. Whitmore leaned forward. I read the incident report from Marja. The ambush, the medevac delay, the casualties. He paused. I also read the classified investigation report that followed. Claire's breath stopped. You were right, Whitmore said quietly. The delay wasn't a tactical decision. It was a political one. The commanding officer who denied your medevac request 17 times did so because the area hadn't been cleared by a senior officer who wasn't even in country at the time. I know that. No, you don't. Whitmore opened the folder. What you don't know is that after your testimony, 3 other incidents were uncovered involving the same CO. Delayed medevacs. Ignored casualty reports. Decisions that prioritized optics over lives. He looked at her directly. Your testimony didn't ruin a career. It exposed a pattern of negligence that had already killed 11 soldiers across 4 deployments. Claire's hands gripped the armrests. That doesn't change the fact that Sarah died. No, but it changes the fact that you blamed yourself. Whitmore's voice was firm but gentle. Lieutenant Chen died because of command failure, not surgical failure. The investigation concluded unanimously that no trauma surgeon, regardless of skill level, could have saved her given the delay and resource constraints. I should have. You saved 11 soldiers under conditions that would have broken most surgeons, Whitmore interrupted. You operated for 16 hours under fire with limited supplies and no backup. The silver star you received wasn't symbolic, it was earned. Claire's throat tightened. She'd never read the full citation, had refused to attend the ceremony, had buried the medal in a box she hadn't opened since. The board reviewed your record, Vance said, and we're prepared to offer you the position we discussed. Senior trauma surgeon with teaching responsibilities. 12-month accelerated residency completion, then full attending privileges. There are conditions, Whitmore added. You'll undergo psychological evaluation to ensure you're fit for high-stress surgical work. You'll meet with our peer support team monthly. And you'll agree to take leave if at any point you feel compromised. I'm not broken, Claire said. No one said you were. Whitmore's expression was understanding. But carrying trauma doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And acknowledging that is what makes you trustworthy. Vance slid a contract across the desk. This is a formal offer. Read it. Think about it. You have 72 hours to decide. Claire stared at the document. Her name, her real name, printed at the top. Major Claire Ashford, MD. Not a ghost, not a lie. Just the truth. 8 months later, the hospital cafeteria was crowded for the lunch shift. Claire stood near the coffee station, reviewing notes for the afternoon training session. Her white coat no longer carried a resident's short length. It was full, with her name embroidered above the pocket. Dr. Claire Ashford, trauma surgery. The transition hadn't been seamless. There had been difficult conversations, awkward adjustments, moments when the weight of her past threatened to crush her present. But the psychological evaluations had helped. So had the peer support sessions, and so had the simple act of finally telling the truth. She was halfway through her second coffee when Dr. Patel approached, tablet in hand. Your 2 o'clock class is full, Patel said. She was smiling. 16 residents signed up. 3 attendings are sitting in to observe. That's too many for hands-on practice. Then we'll run 2 sessions. Patel glanced at the notes Claire was holding. Is that the new triage protocol? Modified version. I'm adding a section on recognizing combat-adjacent injuries in civilian settings. Blast patterns, fragmentation wounds, crush injuries from structural collapse. You think we'll see those here? I've seen them 3 times in the past 6 months. Claire tucked the notes away. Industrial accidents, construction collapses, even car crashes. The injury patterns overlap more than people realize. If we train for the worst, everything else becomes easier. Patel nodded thoughtfully. You've changed the culture here. Trauma mortality is down 19% since you started. That's not just me. That's better protocols, better training. It's you, Patel interrupted gently. You made people realize that speed and precision aren't luxuries, they're necessities. Before Claire could respond, a commotion erupted near the cafeteria entrance. A man in a wheelchair was maneuvering through the doorway, moving with deliberate effort. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, his right leg still in a brace. Behind him, a woman pushed a stroller. Claire recognized him immediately. David Ortega. He spotted her across the room and his face lit up. He wheeled toward her, navigating between tables, and stopped 3 feet away. Major Ashford, he said. Just Claire now, she replied, and you should be resting that leg. Physical therapy cleared me for limited movement. He gestured to the woman behind him. This is my wife, Angela. And this. He reached back to touch the stroller. This is Sophia, 3 months old. Claire looked at the baby, tiny and sleeping, completely unaware that her father had nearly died before she was born. She's beautiful. Claire said quietly, she wouldn't exist if you hadn't saved me twice. David's voice was thick with emotion. I wanted to come here and say thank you, properly. You don't need to. Yes, I do. David straightened in his wheelchair, his posture shifting into something formal, military. Because what you did for me in Afghanistan, and what you did for me here, it's not something I can ever repay, but I can acknowledge it. He lifted his right hand slowly, deliberately, and held it at his temple, a salute, sharp, precise, unmistakably military. The cafeteria noise dimmed. People nearby turned to look. Angela stood at attention beside him, and then from a table near the back, an older man in hospital scrubs stood as well. Claire recognized him, a nurse from the ICU. Veteran, based on the subtle bearing he carried. He saluted too. Then another. A paramedic near the entrance, standing, hand raised. Another. A security guard by the doors. Within 30 seconds, 7 people in the cafeteria stood at attention, saluting. Some were in uniform. Some wore civilian clothes. But all of them carried the same recognition in their eyes. Claire's throat tightened. She hadn't saluted anyone in 3 years. hadn't allowed herself to even think in those terms. But now, standing in a hospital cafeteria, surrounded by people who understood what service meant, she felt something shift inside her. She raised her hand, slowly, steadily, and returned the salute. The room held that moment for 5 perfect seconds. Then David lowered his hand, and the others followed, and the noise of the cafeteria gradually resumed. But something had changed. Claire felt it in her chest, in the loosening of a knot she'd carried since Marja. "Thank you," David said quietly, "for everything." Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. David wheeled away with his family, and the cafeteria returned to normal. But Claire stayed where she was, staring at her hand, at the fingers that had saved lives in war zones and operating rooms, that had carried guilt and grief, and finally, something close to peace. Dr. Patel touched her shoulder gently. "You okay?" "Yeah." Claire lowered her hand. "I think I am." That afternoon, Claire stood in the simulation lab in front of 16 residents and 3 attending physicians. The mannequin on the table had been modified to simulate a chest trauma, collapsed lung, cardiac involvement, multiple entry wounds. "Speed matters," Claire said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd lived the lessons she was teaching. "But precision matters more. You can be fast and sloppy, and your patient dies. You can be slow and meticulous, and your patient dies. The goal is to find the intersection, fast enough to beat the clock, precise enough to do it right." She demonstrated the thoracotomy approach she'd used on David. The residents watched in silence, their eyes tracking every movement. "This procedure terrifies most surgeons," Claire continued, "and it should. You're opening a chest and operating on a beating heart. But in the right circumstances, with the right training, it's the only thing that saves the patient." One of the residents raised her hand. "How do you stay calm when everything is falling apart?" Claire paused. It was the question she'd asked herself 1,000 times. "You don't stay calm," she said finally. "You acknowledge the fear, and then you act anyway. You trust your training. You focus on the next step, not the whole picture. And you remember that hesitation kills more patients than bold action." She looked around the room. Every person in this room will face a moment where you have to make an impossible decision, where the odds say your patient won't survive, but something in your gut says they might. That's when you'll understand what this work really is. "And what is it?" another resident asked. "Refusing to give up when everyone else already has." The training session ran 2 hours. When it ended, the residents filed out slowly, still discussing what they'd learned. The attending physicians stayed behind. "That was exceptional," one of them said. "You should consider presenting this at the National Trauma Conference." "I'm not ready for that." "You're more ready than most people who present." He handed her a card. "Think about it. The work you're doing here, it needs to be shared." After they left, Claire stood alone in the simulation lab, looking at the mannequin on the table. It was just plastic and electronics, but in her mind, she saw every patient she'd ever fought for. The ones she'd saved, the ones she'd lost. And for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel crushed by the weight of those memories. She felt anchored by them. Her pager buzzed. Trauma incoming. She was needed in the ER. Claire grabbed her coat and headed for the door, her stride confident. Her hands steady, her mind clear. She was exactly where she was meant to be. 3 months after that, Claire received a letter from the Department of Defense. They wanted her to consult on a new curriculum for combat medic training, integrating lessons learned from recent conflicts into updated protocols. She said yes. 6 months later, her training program was adopted by 4 regional trauma centers across the Pacific Northwest. Survival rates in high-acuity trauma cases improved by an average of 14%. And 1 year after that day in the cafeteria, Claire stood on a stage at the National Trauma Symposium and presented her research to an audience of 800 physicians. She titled her presentation, "Refusing to Give Up: Combat Surgical Principles in Civilian Emergency Medicine." When she finished, the applause lasted 2 full minutes. But the moment that mattered most came afterward, in the hallway, when a young resident approached her nervously. "Dr. Ashford," the woman said, "I just wanted to say thank you. I'm former Air Force. I've been hiding my military background because I thought it would make people see me as less of a physician." Claire looked at her, really looked, and saw herself 3 years earlier. "Your background doesn't make you less," Claire said quietly. It makes you different. And medicine needs different. The resident's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know if I belonged here. You belong exactly where you choose to stand. Claire squeezed her shoulder. Don't waste time hiding who you are. The world needs what you can offer. The woman nodded, wiped her eyes, and walked away with her head higher than before. Claire watched her go and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, not the fragile kind that shatters under pressure, but the durable kind, forged in fire and failure and the stubborn refusal to give up. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a photo David had sent last month. Sophia, now 14 months old, taking her first wobbly steps. The message below it read, "She's going to grow up, knowing that courage looks like a woman who wouldn't let her father die. Thank you for being that woman." Claire stared at the photo for a long moment, then tucked the phone away and walked back into the symposium, into the noise and the crowd, and the work that would never truly end. Because some training never leaves you. Some debts never expire. Some identities can't be erased. They can only be honored. And Claire Ashford had finally learned to honor hers.